every now and again, it's almost as if we have to have something bad happen to hit the reset button and remind us what's really important here. And so most of our issues come when we're not paying attention to the lower class, we're not paying attention to social injustices because we're just living in the euphoria of our happy moment. And that's where the nation begins to divide. Because for some people, they don't have happy moments. For instance, if I'm a hurricane victim and I don't have insurance on my home was destroyed. For somebody who's upper or middle class, you have insurance, your home is rebuilt by now. But if I'm a single mom with 4 kids and I have no home now, most of these people are still living in hotels with no idea where they're gonna get their next meal. And there seems to be a disconnect once the upper class is good. They detach themselves from the lower class. But tragedy has a great way of equalizing all classes. So when everybody has no home, then we're all in this together. But the minute that I get myself healed again, then you no longer matter. And that's where you start seeing dissension happen. And I think that's where we are right now.
Very welcome to the Scandinavian Herald Report, Reverend Devon Johnson.
Yes, ma'am.
You are a pastor here at the Windsor Village, the United Methodist Church, and you have traveled across America for years and also done a lot of work on college campuses. And we have come here to America to discuss and find out what has gone so terribly wrong in American culture, as we've seen your country go from being a beacon of light in so many ways. But we have noticed that you guys now seem to be a culture of hatred. White against black, men against women, atheist against Christian. So we'd love to hear your analysis on the current situation in the United States.
Well, yeah, much of what you said is right. There's a lot of things that have happened nationally for us that is not unprecedented. It comes in waves for us. And anytime you see issues like what we're having now with the current generation, it immediately points you to the previous generations and trying to find out where did we go wrong. And so you try to find the last time everything was good, Like when was the last time, we felt love and we felt unity and we felt those things. And normally you can look back at a situation that unified the country. And so there's a great pastor by the name of Brian Loritz, and he preached this sermon about one new man. And he was talking about this picture. It's a very famous picture of a sailor who's holding this woman and kissing this woman, and everybody in the background is celebrating. And it was a bunch of soldiers coming home from war. And you would almost think by the picture that the man and the woman were married or boyfriend or girlfriend. And it turns out they didn't even know each other. But they were so unified and happy because the war had ended. And they were coming home because the war was over. And in that one moment, the whole country was united because the war was over. When 9/11 happened for us, catastrophic. But what happened immediately after that, you saw the entire nation come together like never before. For that 1 month in September, nobody cared about religion. Nobody cared about differences in race. We were trying to heal. And it always seems like the country does its worst when we feel like we're good. But we're always loving the most when we have tragedy hit us. Just recently last year, here in Houston, we had a hurricane. Once in 100 years or 1,000 years, I believe it was, and it destroyed the city. You've never seen a city more unified than when that happened. Now, prior to that, you would hear things of racism and you would hear things about social injustice and things like that. But during the hurricane, you heard nothing about it. In fact, you saw police officers riding boats to get children out of houses, regardless of creed or color. You heard nothing about racism. So where are we actually good? Is it when everything is going right? Or is it when tragedy strikes and it sobers us? And so I think where we've come to is every now and again, it's almost as if we have to have something bad happen to hit the reset button and remind us what's really important here. And so most of our issues come when we're not paying attention to the lower class, we're not paying attention to social injustices because we're just living in the euphoria of our happy moment. And that's where the nation begins to divide. Because for some people, they don't have happy moments. For instance, if I'm a hurricane victim and I don't have insurance on my home was destroyed. For somebody who's upper or middle class, you have insurance, your home is rebuilt by now. But if I'm a single mom with 4 kids and I have no home now, most of these people are still living in hotels with no idea where they're going to get their next meal. And there seems to be a disconnect once the upper class is good. They detach themselves from the lower class. But tragedy has a great way of equalizing all classes. So when everybody has no home, then we're all in this together. But the minute that I get myself healed again, then you no longer matter. And that's where you start seeing dissension happen. And I think that's where we are right now, is there's a certain class that is doing great, and there's a certain class that has been still struggling. And they're trying to find the equilibrium, and we're fighting about it. And what I believe God instituted for moments like this is the church. We're supposed to be the great equalizer, that for those who are upper class and for those who are lower class, we meet them in the middle and we become the joint to a broken nation. But unfortunately, we haven't been that in recent years.
Is it a question of class more than anything in the United States? Because when you look at the U.S., I think you have to go back to 1987 or something to find the high point of economic growth for you guys, where a family could, have a one income and still survive and all of that. And now you see 2-3 people having 2-3 jobs and all of that. And
Yeah.
and you see really the Far East. I travel a lot in the Far East and in the Middle East as well. They're rich. They are very rich.
Yeah.
They do well. Everybody has maids, and it's a high-end life compared to much of what you see here in the United States. When you compare, for example, the airports, it's striking when you're in the Middle East. I mean, it's like you're in Disney World for real, with golden columns and whole aquariums, the whole wall, and
Wow.
and gold on the floor, and they're so wealthy. And then you come to America, and you see the airports. It's like going back to the 1970s. I'm thinking they could do. We were in Miami. They can make a film from the 1970s and just use the airport there. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you're wondering in Los Angeles and all of that. It seems that somehow you lost the care for your, especially lower classes.
All the way. We definitely have. And I think it's because, if I'm being honest, I think there's this idea that existed called the Commonwealth. And I think that was more European in nature, and we tried to do it here. It didn't happen. But the idea is that everybody benefits from the wealth of the society. So in the Middle East, oil is very present, and so you can see cities that are transformed by a national export. But for America, we find most of that are people who are coming in, they're trying to make a living and they're trying to do these things, but for the most part, there's very little resource that people can experience. So there is no commonwealth. There is wealthy, and then there's non-wealthy, and there's people trying to strive in the middle. And so what I realize is that people value things different here. We don't value unity. We don't value family as much. We value money. We value possessions. We value status. And if you notice, most people who have come into a position of having great money and great status, they can care less about this part. But when they fall, or if they lose money, or if the stock market crashes and they come down, their whole world ends. They have no idea how to exist down here. Now imagine if everybody was in Commonwealth. Then that means that if I was having a high moment and I lost that, I at least have my neighbor who can keep me afloat, and we'll be in this together. And if my neighbor falls, I can pick them up. But that's not the system we exist at here. That's not how we exist. In fact, most of the wealth comes off of the work of the lower class. So I build myself off of you. So as long as you stay down, I can stay up. And so that's why normally you'll see lower class get pushed down with certain laws, pushed down by certain social injustices, because if it becomes equal and common, then that means that we're all existing together, and I have to depend on you, and you have to depend on me, and I don't know how to exist in that space. And so that becomes an issue. That becomes a huge issue for us.
I think about Saint Hieronymus. I was recently in Bethlehem, in the West Bank, and it was just very interesting because Saint Hieronymus, he was an early thinker who lived at the time of the fall of the Roman Empire, and he lived in Rome for many years, and then he said, you know what, I'm tired. He became very unpopular in Rome too, yeah, because he spoke the truth, and he told them to get their act together and many of these things, and spoke of a better morality and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So he left Rome, the great city of Rome, and he went to the dusty parts of Judea at the time. He was the first man to translate the Bible as well. But my point was that Rome fell. And he's written about how the Roman elite that used to be high in the courts then came begging in the streets in Judea because they were kicked out of Rome because the German tribes sacked Rome, as we know. So just thinking about that in this context as well, because many speak of and question whether we yet again are at the crossroads of the end of an empire, then thinking about America. What are your thoughts on this?
You know, what's funny is that as an American, you never think of what would happen if we weren't the most powerful nation. It never becomes a thought. And even when you talk about Rome and the fall of Rome, you think that will never happen to us. But if you follow the trend of human history, you will always see the decline of a great empire at some point. And it's always a matter of what is the tipping point that causes that nation to fall. And for Rome, you know, it was very interesting. Their model of spreading was actually really good. It was a great way of doing things. They would come in and they would set up their ambassadors and their governors, and they would make your town like Rome. So if you're a poor town and the Romans showed up, as much as you may not have liked the culture, you at least will benefit from the culture of Rome by upgrading your cities. They may strip away your gods, but they're gonna give you better buildings and things like this. And so you would notice that there was almost an influence of Commonwealth in that. Now, the problem with that is that it became an elitist type of environment. And so even though you were being upgraded physically and your city was being changed, they didn't care about you as much. And so whatever you held dear, they cherished none of that. They wanted you to be like them. So when you start seeing trends like that, where there are powerful leaders who are trying to get groups of people to assimilate to be like them or like their culture, that's normally when you see the tipping point. And you look at America, that's kind of the problem that we're having here, is that there is a huge struggle with people who are trying to make the nation feel like them. It doesn't celebrate the diversity and the inclusion that we've been built upon, but it's like we want you to assimilate to our values, assimilate to our opinions. And when you have that problem, you start seeing the trend of a toppling nation. And so it's very concerning. It's very concerning when certain people are elected into power and they are given the ability to shape the nation to feel like what they want. They're not about the people, they're about themselves. And that's very scary because that's what causes nations to fall. And so I do see that. I do see that as a problem. And what's worse about that is that in this political climate, it is being branded as a Christian formation, as though we're trying to reform you to look like Christ. And the problem is a lot of the principles that are being spoken from certain political platforms don't match what Christ preached in the streets. And so when you start throwing out the idea of this is Christian, this is Christ, and it's not, then when the nation falls, it gets blamed on whatever brand you put on it. And it's unfair to the church. And really at this point, the church needs to stand up and speak out and become active in the community to prevent an entire nation from being formed into something that's not like Christ.
And it's remarkable when you compare to the revolutionary Jesus, walking there as he was a Middle Eastern guy. I mean, it's a paradox because we often see him pictured as blue-eyed and, you know, blonde hair like me, but sad for me, he was not blue-eyed and he was not blonde-haired.
No, he was not, no.
He was, you know, a man of color. And that's just such a wonderful thought.
Yeah.
He was somebody that belonged to the world, not only to the few.
That's right.
And he for sure did not belong to the rich. Well, yet again he did, because it's, in the sense that if you have humility and you have a lot of money, of course you're so welcome in his world.
Wow.
Well, so it's not that, but looking at his example, that rings a few bells many times pertaining to the question of class and how we treat each other and create unity in the society.
There it is. And you know what's funny is that's what this generation is looking for. They've heard about Jesus all their lives. Okay, even the atheist has heard about Christ in America. The issue is that the person that we paint an image of, it doesn't seem to match our actions in the earth. And so right now in this political climate and in all this craziness and the class system, they're looking for the revolutionary Jesus that they read about. They're like, well, where is the Christian that does what Christ does? Where's the Christian that goes out and finds the poor and serves? So you'll find a lot of millennials who are trying to find churches not that are charismatic or not that have great, programs or a great building. They're looking for the church that's the most active in the streets. They're looking for the person who's balancing this class system, who's going to help bring justice. Because most of the people who are flooding into churches right now, or who are looking for churches right now, are people who are disenfranchised, and they're looking for Jesus. And this is why he came. When he came, he would literally walk marketplaces and he would find disenfranchised people. He would find women, he would find men, he would find whoever needed it, and he would meet the need despite what the church was saying. That's the scary part. You see very little where the Roman government was messing with Jesus until he got crucified. You really see most of his issues were coming from the church as he dealt with the society at that time. And that's scary to think about, that we're back there again. That now the churches, they don't want to go out. They don't want to help bring commonwealth. They don't want to serve those people. And they miss it because Jesus, you talked about the rich and the poor. You're talking about a king who leaves his throne in the perfection of heaven to come dwell in this place called earth with sinful man. If there was ever an example of balancing commonwealth, he goes, I'm bringing everything that I have, and I want you guys to have it down here. So he goes, pray this prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So what are you seeing? You're seeing the perfection of heaven, and you're seeing like this dirty earth, and God wants to bring them together and make these things common. That's the whole mission of the church, is to start paving the way for heaven to be here. And you want to give people this experience that Jesus did. And because we don't do that, then it leaves our nation in shambles. It's crazy to me that we literally will let people starve in the streets. We had one of the coldest days in Houston's history out here. And there are literally homeless people who have died. Our mayor is making announcements of people who died in alleyways because they had no place to go. And we're in the Bible Belt. We're talking about more churches in the state of Texas than probably anywhere else in the nation. You're going to find more churches in the South. How does that happen where you have churches on every corner and there are people who are dying in alleyways? How does that work?
It's a very good question. And when I first came here to the great state, Lone Star State of Texas many, many years ago, I was looking very much forward to seeing the Christian groups here and being my own kind of Christian always, and
right.
Having grown up in Africa and used to dance and all of that. We used to love all of that, and I was thinking, let me just see how the environment is here. Mm-hmm. I found a lot of makeup. I love makeup. I found a lot of makeup, and everybody says Jesus loves you and all of that.
Yeah.
But I was frankly sorry. I hope it's no offense, but I was wondering, how come all these Christians over here that are so glad to go to church with all their stuff, and they sure know how to quote Bible verses, but boy, do they love putting bombs, in the Middle East. And boy, do we hear little about, how to care for Middle Eastern Christians, let alone Muslims, let alone the groups that live there. And now with the environment we have now of I would say almost hatred towards Muslims. Didn't we just survive a Second World War where we did the same against Jews? How can you use the ethnic card? And how can many of these Christian groups here, sir, in your country, be so cold and with so less empathy, with so many of the nations abroad that are on the receiving end of these weapons industry you have here?
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about Jesus as a church in America. We talk about Jesus from context. We say, this is a figure. This is a person you should believe in. This is a person. We talk about him in context, but never in relationship. It always seems like for a lot of Christians, they utilize quoting scripture, attendance in church. I pay a certain amount of money to my church. All of these things as standards to validate the resume as a Christian. Christ used none of that. He used two things. I mean, Jesus literally said it. He says, if you want to really understand what it's about, hang your hat on these two things. Love God with everything in you. And then he goes, love your neighbor as you love yourself. If we could just master those two things. But it seems like the church skips over that. And we focus on these commandments that we want people to follow. And Jesus says, can you love? And he never put a qualifier on that. He didn't say you love people who do what you want. Doesn't even say you love people who are your friends. He pushes you to do the exact opposite. He goes, love those people that feel unlovable to you. And so if you're a Republican, love a Democrat. If you're a white person who's racist, he goes, if you're a Christian, that means you got to love the black person or the Muslim. And when you see those things void, it makes you wonder, well then, are you really Christian? Or are you claiming an organization because you think it's going to be your card into heaven? And Jesus made it very clear. Many people on the last day will say, Lord, Lord, I laid hands on the sick in your name, and I did all these things that are Christian things. And he goes, depart from me, I never knew you. Now, how is that possible that Christ would say that all of these people did things in his name, but they don't make it in? Could it be that we've lost the core of who Christ is, which is love? And he loved us before we even knew who he was. We begin to grade sins, homosexuality, or we begin Muslims, other religions, and we say, well, we can't associate with these people, and we can't be next to these people because I'm Christian. But Christ is the exact opposite, is that I associate with these people because I am Christian, because I am Christ. I come out here and I do this with these people because I want them to experience my love. So you have Apostle Paul who shows up, and I love this because this is one of the sermons that Brian Loritz preached. He goes, anytime Paul would come in, he would go to two places in each city, the temple, and then he would go into the marketplace. He would preach first to the Jew, and then he would preach to the Gentile. Same gospel, two different groups. That to me seems like the heart of Christ, is that we all need him, and we all need to be more like him, but the commonality is his love. So I will go spend time in the marketplace with my brother who may not even know who Jesus is, or may have no want to be a part of him. That has nothing to do with our relationship. Let me just love you. Let me just show you what it looks like to be loved even when you don't believe in me, or loved even when you don't believe in God. That's what God did for us. He loved us before we got saved. He loved us into being saved. His love is what saved us. So if you eliminate love, then what is Christianity really based on? Rules, regulations, and that's why you have more denominations in a religion than any other religion. We have more denominations in Christianity, and none of them have a center point of love. That's why we fail, and that's why we hate, and that's why we can't be unified, and that's why we look schizophrenic to the rest of the world. It's to the point now where other countries are sending missionaries into America to give us the gospel. The places we used to send people to are looking at us going, man, they're powerful, but they don't know Jesus. So let's send our missionaries into their cities and into their towns, and let's give them Jesus. What does that say about us as a nation, that we have more churches than any other nation, but people are sending Jesus to us? That's where it's coming from, is that we don't have an authentic relationship with God that would call us into love with people that we deem unlovable. That's crazy to me. Yeah.
Reverend Devon Johnson, it's been such an honor speaking to you, and thank you for enlightening us
Thank you.
on your thoughts and of these important issues. And we thank you very much for participating here
Thank you.
at the Scandinavian Herland Report. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.